Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be with you.
Great to have you here. There's this great line in Shakespeare. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, that are dreamt of in your philosophy. You are a Shakespeare guy. You got to the world of data through Shakespeare. But is there truly more in life than is dreamt of in data? It's a lot, right? I mean, data is pretty big, right? And this is why you've written the book, right? Because it's pretty comprehensive.
When I wrote the book, I tried to put everything on paper that I would have wanted to tell myself in the earlier part of my career. How could I abstract the key ideas from data, even the superpowers that data has? And to do that, I took a lot of notes and tried to really crystallize my thinking over patterns that I'd observed in my whole career in the world of technology and data. And then I sought out people who were experts and whose work really exemplified those key ideas and even those superpowers. So the more in heaven and earth that is dreamt of was, for me in writing this book, the little book of data, was me getting to know these data practitioners and being introduced to the wonderful world that they worked in and the incredibly complex and important problems that they solved with data, and getting kind of blown away by these professionals and their stories.
You know, you describe in the book, you talk about the Library of Alexandria, which, gosh, one of the great tragedies of history. Right? What did we lose? Right? I mean, it's just unbelievable. But you say the Library of Alexandria was not a library like we think of libraries today, a place you go to snack and text while pretending to do homework. The Library of Alexandria was basically Stanford University, a lavish campus with landscaping, sculpture, scholars with bad hygiene puttering around the grounds, thinking great thoughts, living off a stipend. Now, do they have bad hygiene by what standards? I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, like, I'm imagining some, like,
That is not where I thought you were going with that, Scott.
Yeah, I'm thinking by what? I mean, by their own standards. I mean, are people like, or you're saying by contemporary standards? Like, if we went back, like Bill and Ted's. I mean, what were you thinking about these guys? I mean, this is an unusual observation, an unusual data point, shall we say?
Well, to me, what's fascinating, there's so many things that are fascinating about the Library of Alexandria, but what it told me was how we as a civilization used to store data. We would store it in parchment scrolls. It would be in a giant dark room that you would have to know your way around to navigate. Each of the scrolls would represent a whole work, which might be multiple scrolls in a shelf, and they would have these things called pinaques, or tablets, labels for each scroll. And in that environment, the pinaques, the tablets that talked about each scroll, would say, what's the first line of the scroll? What's it called? Who's the author? And where is the author from? They cared that much about the Greek city-states to care about what city-state the author was from. And that was the metadata or data tagging system that we had back then. But it was also important for me to illustrate, or what I was trying to illustrate, was just how important it is as a development for us that we can now store data so cheaply. It turns data into...
Yeah, because you talk about in the book, actually, how expensive, how basically now, I mean, they're offering other kingdoms, like, what would today be millions and millions of dollars, and they're like, look, we'll send you all the stuff back, but we want to copy it first. And then it's so funny you point out, but they sent back the copies.
They were gangsters. So this is the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies, they were, I'm no historian, but they were a imperial dynasty in Egypt, but basically of Greek origin. And it took the focus and the treasure of this empire in order to maintain the Library of Alexandria. So that's kind of the key point I'm trying to land with that metaphor, that you had to have an empire giving its best shot in order to store that much data. But yeah, there were some really fun anecdotes around it because Ptolemy Euergetes, who was one of the key library builders in that dynasty, was a gangster. He would, every ship that came into Alexandria, they would search your trunk, and if they found scrolls, aka books, they would take them, copy them, and give you the copies back and keep the originals. And he was doing that all around the world. Sometimes, in one example, when Athens was having a famine, they showed up with a boatload of food and said, "We'll give you the food, but first give us your books." That's how focused they were on creating and maintaining the library. But now all this magnificence that's involved in storing data happens on your phone, and on the other end there's a data center. And Antigone, which took the resources of an empire to store in the old days, now just takes a few cents a year to store.
Yeah, it's completely remarkable. Yeah, I want to ask you about something in a Platonic dialogue I like in the Phaedrus, right? In the beginning of the Phaedrus, or somewhere in the Phaedrus, I don't think it's actually in the beginning, but there's Socrates recounts this myth about the god Theuth, who is before the king of Egypt, right? King Themis and he says, yeah, he brings him the invention of writing. And he basically says, this is going to improve memory. It's going to improve wisdom. It's going to be fantastic. I'm imagining we're going to make Egypt great again. But he's, and the king is very interesting. He says, no, it's not. It's not going to do any of those things. It's going to make people seem like they're smarter, but I remember I heard the president of Princeton Seminary once say to an incoming group of students, remember, an ignoramus is somebody that doesn't know something you just read. And the king of Egypt is like, it's going to make people seem wise. It's going to diminish their memory. It's going to diminish their recall. It's really going to make for shittier people, not better people, right? Now, this is an interesting, I always come back to this little exchange from this dialogue whenever I'm thinking about technology or something, right? Because this is the ultimate, there's always the promise in peril. For you, Justin, data, does it make us better people? Does it change the human condition? How does it change us? Is it making us better, or is it making us worse?
Well, one would be willfully ignorant not to see the peril side of the argument. And the peril side of the argument has been about the use of data in civilization, has been really brilliantly told in at least two books, one by Shoshana Zuboff called Surveillance Capitalism, and another by Cathy O'Neill called Weapons of Mass Destruction. Both Shoshana Zuboff mainly talks about how the big tech companies have in effect created a deceptive apparatus to part us from our data and make money from it. And Cathy O'Neill talks about everything that can go wrong when you rely on an algorithm to make an important decision and you don't really know what's in the algorithm. And those are really important points to make. And there will continue to be books about the peril of the use of data. And we should be vigilant. What I was trying to accomplish with the little book of data was, first of all, to empower the user to feel like they understood data, to explain data to the non-expert. And the reason why I felt
mission accomplished. After reading it, I felt more informed. And I got some cool anecdotes, which I'll get to it. There's some very cool things to share. But if I'm your target reader, mission accomplished.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you. And when we try to get our heads around something that's inherently intimidating, and I think that's the main issue, is that data seems technical, it seems complicated, it seems like you have to have a computer science degree or a math degree or a stats degree to understand it. And the fact is, after working in the data industry for 20 years, I realized, working with data is really about ideas. It's really about what you want the data to do. And so if you understand the handful of concepts about how data matches and how you can use data to score an opportunity and how you store it and how you count something as basic as counting, and how important all those are to the function of data, then you can really put those principles to work for you and for your mission. So my goal.
I just want to say you have a great thing you recommend in the book. I just want. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to point this out that I thought was utterly brilliant and simple. You suggest an exercise, and you say, just go find a data worker and go ask them what they're doing. Walk into the Comcast building or whatever. Find someone around your office. Ask them what they're doing. If you don't understand it, just ask them to break it down a little more simply into smaller parts, and eventually you'll get it. I think this is so brilliant and so simple, but it gets at what you're saying right now, right? That this, I think, the anxiety that people have, that data, big data, it's algorithmic, it's mathematical, it's for geeks, it's for people that know how to use computer programs with weird acronym names, and you're like, no, it's just, even the most complex stuff, you can break it down, right? And this is stuff that's manageable and understandable, right?
Yeah, and to finish the first thought, I guess I had to consciously make a decision for the length of the book not to get into the peril of data and to focus on the promise, because you have to be excited about putting data to work to fulfill your mission in order to really want to get it. And I think that's important, and it is positive. It is focused on the promise, and to accomplish that familiarity and fluency and comfort and confidence with data. I go back to this one formative experience I had in my career. I was working at the Nielsen Company, which does the TV ratings. And at the time,
I would kill to be in Nielsen. I don't watch enough TV now, but well, I guess I'm on an iPad, I guess, if that's tall. But I always thought I'm like, you're shaping what we all see. It's so fantastic. I always wanted to be one.
It's a really fascinating company to have worked at. And at one point in the life of the Nielsen Company, we were taken over by private equity. And it was just like every private equity. It was like KKR and Blackstone and Carlyle and the whole group. And there was this one moment where, a period where the data experts at Nielsen were coming in and in effect being debriefed by the bankers so that the bankers could really understand the business and understand if they wanted to spend a few $1 billion buying Nielsen. And so I was in the room because I was in the corporate strategy team, and these lions of the Nielsen business, these guys who really managed complicated businesses, and they're mostly guys, would come in, and in private equity, they're all afraid of losing their job. So the Nielsen leaders had this incentive to make their work seem more complicated. And so the bankers would sit on the other side of the table, and there's like one of the few times where the bankers are really the heroes. And the bankers would say, well, tell me about this data product. And the guy would say, well, there are 50 different data sources in this product and 50 different algorithms, and thinking that was going to intimidate them to walk away. But instead, the banker said, okay, there are 50 different data sources. Tell me about data source number 1. And the guy would break it down. And then they would say, now tell me about data source number 2. And he would say, hey, let's order in lunch. You can go long, can't you? And of course, this guy owes him his job, so he's going to go long. And that way, these bankers broke down every single data source, every single algorithm, every single use case into a way that they, as non-experts in data, could understand. And I had this total moment sitting there watching this as a drama, saying to myself, this can be done. You can break down any algorithm and any data source into its component parts so that you can understand it. And I made it a rule for myself. Anytime with the companies I work for, I'm evaluating a data set or evaluating an opportunity with data, I have to be able to understand it in English or in business. And my stakeholders have to be able to do the same before we're going to make a move, because you really need to understand the guts, and you can.
You quote John Gaunt, who's this guy who does all this research in 17th century England, right? Is it 17th century? Yeah.
John Gaunt, he evaluated cause of death data.
So great. I'm surprised no one ever wrote a folk song with that title, Cause of Death Data. But I love this in the context of this London plague. He writes, this is just such a great sentence. I proceeded that I might present the world with some real fruit from those airy blossoms. And I underlined that. I thought, this is fantastic, right? Because real fruit, in the sense of, I think in our culture today, we have a bias against abstraction. Like, we almost use, if we say that's abstract, right? That's a and that's an insult. It's almost never used as a positive, right? But there's a sense in which, without abstraction, there's no thinking, right? There's just things in front of us that are uninterpreted, right? That are just not, and they don't tell a story. They don't mean anything. That unless you take the data and make it tell a story, make it sing, unless you take it and put it in some relationships, whether they're causal or matching or anything, then it doesn't tell anything. So in some sense, abstraction is where the beauty lies, right? I mean, that's part of what you get at in your book.
Well, I love that you pulled out that phrase. I love that phrase too, and there's so much in it. First of all, to call data airy blossoms, I just love, because there's nothing more abstract than data. It's simply numbers. And
wouldn't that be a great thing to put on your dating profile as an MIT student or something? I see data as an airy blossom. You would get swiped right every time with the nerdy girls or the nerdy guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part of it is that John Grant was focused on real fruit. And so the thing that frustrated, so John Grant's story is that he was a hat maker who, I guess from handling measuring tape, just got so obsessed with data. We really don't know why he was obsessed with data, but he got frustrated with the London authorities because the plague arrived in London. Tens of thousands of people were dying every year from the plague, but it was differentiated from different neighborhoods. And he was playing a little Malcolm Gladwell tipping point by listening to his own frustration and saying, listen, city authorities, you're not doing enough with this data, these bills of mortality that are telling you who's dying in what neighborhoods of what causes. And so he got in there and started to tidy up the methodology, make it more consistent, show trends over time, break it down by neighborhood and by cause of death. And he was looking to save lives by using this data. So he was trying to take something very abstract, which was these tallies of dead, very Monty Python from every neighborhood in London, and take these tables and make real fruit of them, which is to say, have a real cause and effect, have a real impact on the world and truly save lives. And that's really a key part of the story of data, I believe, which is it's for a purpose. There's to pivot, but kind of bookend this anecdote. John Tukey was this Princeton statistician who in the 60s said, wait a minute, statistics is not the most boring arm of the mathematics department. Statistics should be used to make decisions, and data should be used to make decisions, even with incomplete information, because what we're trying to accomplish is to have a better answer to our questions than we had yesterday, thanks to the data we have access to. So even though the blossoms are airy and it's all extremely abstract, what we need is something we can bite into, fruit, which is an action that will have an impact on our lives.
Can you say the Princeton mathematician's name again?
John Tukey, Tukey.
No, wasn't he the guy where I think I have it in my notes here, but you're writing of him. I think this is him. And you say it was revolutionary. He was saying that the discipline should not be about professionals combing through small samples and using careful, cautious, correct math to make a defensible projection. To hell with cautious and correct. Make errors, moderate ones anyway. Use inadequate evidence. Use your math as a tool, as a means, not an end. The idea is to make something useful. Collaborate with people who might not know math the way you do, but are experts in the domain you're working in. That is so great and so interesting, right? That's so compelling. And it's something that I wish, you could tell more students, right? Make errors. Be bold, right? That you'll actually, it seems like you're saying it's against the stereotype of the sort of sterile mathematician, right?
Yeah, it was telling to me that both John Grant in the 1600s and John Tukey in World War II and the Cold War were both coming at the use of data during times of life and death. And they recognized that it's really about getting a better answer, not on getting the right answer. And Tukey's frustration was that people were using math and statistics for proofs And that is an airy blossom leading to an airy blossom. That's not an airy blossom leading to fruit. And Tukey really anticipated a lot of the world that we live in now around data, which is we're going from a world of sample data, which is small data that you get from a survey, to a world of big data that you would collect from smartphones or from other data sources at massive quantities that you're processing in massive quantities in order to make lots and lots of decisions in a very scalable way. And Tukey saw, in addition to the change of the data scale, the role that computing would play in that process, where if you can process things, you can store data very cheaply and you can process it relatively cheaply, you can make decisions which should be practical.
What do you worry? I mean, this is we're so aware in our current political climate, our cultural climate of income inequality, right? That over the past decades, the wealthy get, the 1% get exponentially richer, and everyone else seems to stagnate. Do you worry about I mean, I can imagine some reactions to your work being like, okay, data is just going to be one more thing that exacerbates the inequality, right? The 1% are going to have more of it. They're going to get better at utilizing it, just like they get better accountants to not pay the taxes and better lawyers to beat the rap. They're going to get better data people to screw us all. Another way could be to look at this could be, look, no, this could be the great equalizer, right? That you can be in somewhere in Indonesia or India with a smartphone, you've got access to the data store just like the guy in Silicon Valley. Well, I mean, where do you back to the promise peril? Do you think there's more promise around mitigating inequality with data, or is there more of a peril that it could make the inequality worse?
I think there's a great peril that it would make the inequality worse, which was one of my motivations for writing the book. My personal experience, which I was working at Comcast, a cable company at the time, and I was observing that there were a lot of people just kind of bailing out of their careers at the moment where data and technology and machine learning were just starting to drive the marketing and advertising industry. And they were just they gave up. They said, I can't really learn this. I can't be effective at this. And, I'm going to go do something else or just retire early. And I thought that was sort of tragic, especially because a lot of these people were my friends and they were incredibly talented and they had wonderful leadership qualities. And I felt like my background, because I'd published a couple of books before, and because came into the data business as an English major, and I had kind of become the data guy that you prop up in front of the client to explain the complicated ideas. I'm like, I can use these tools to help non-data people understand data and equip them thereby, going back to your generous comment about feeling more data fluent, equip them to use data for their mission. And that mission doesn't have to be digital advertising, and it doesn't have to be creating a new protein to create a new pharmaceutical. It can be to help your local library. It can be, I actually advised a nonprofit that does urban gardens. And what could be further from the world of big data than urban gardens? But the leadership at this organization had a great approach. They said, well, listen, we want to be able to raise money better. And to do that, we have to prove that putting an urban garden in a spot that used to be a vacant lot has an impact on the world. So how can we take data and show how putting the urban garden helped people eat better, or it created community, or it helped the climate? And there's lots of data available about the impact of more fresh fruit and vegetables and green space on food and climate. And they put it to work to create metrics that would further their mission. And so if they can do it, anyone can. And I believe that it's important for everyone to use data to fulfill their mission. On the peril side, you can see that built into the structure of how we use data is scale. And that means if you have a really powerful data set and you have a technology sufficient to scale the answers that that data set gives you to millions and millions, even billions of people, then you have an opportunity to make enormous profits very efficiently. And so the rise of big tech and the enormous profits that that has generated and the enormous wealth that has generated to, only hundreds of employees has, yes, accelerated the inequality we have in our world. Again, hence my desire to have more people understand it and be educated and be confident about data for themselves.
It's so interesting. As I was reading your book, I love post-apocalyptic stuff as a genre. As a huge Walking Dead guy, the rest of the new one, that the rest of us, whatever, on Apple TV is so interesting, or HBO Max rather. And I think about, as I was reading your book, I thought, it's so interesting. The major thing, maybe, in something like The Walking Dead, is the loss of data, right? Like all of a sudden, like you've got people that are used to the data abundant world, right? That they don't live where all the data is in Alexandria or something, right? And then all of a sudden they go like back to the world where you've got to gather data like they did in Alexandria, right? I mean, that's so traumatic.
Yeah.
For what it means to be a human being. So are you going to survive the zombie apocalypse when you're unplugged?
Yes, I will. I will have been trained in pattern recognition so that I may advance my chances of survival.
I thought you were just going to say that you'll just go back to Shakespeare, guy. You'll get a couple great pieces of English literature. You'll get a candle, and you'll just hole up with your family.
Yeah, that may be the answer.
Now, I mean, you do talk about data as a superpower.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that really, this is one of the things that really sets us apart evolutionarily, right? Our capacity to store data, to harness it, to interpret it, to use it as a superpower. How is it a superpower?
Data gives us 4 superpowers, and the most essential one is the power of omniscience, which technically means you are able to know everything at the same time. I like to think of it as seeing everything at the same time. And in a business or other environment, it means that you can take information from every store that is in your chain and get the sales data per store and bring it back to you. And suddenly you have a spreadsheet or a program that allows you to make decisions and have control over every store in the system. Or it's that many weather stations giving you information about weather conditions globally that helps you make decisions about climate change. The specific story I tell in the book is the story of a tech nonprofit called a tech climate nonprofit called Climate Trace that could only exist in San Francisco. And they use satellite data to, in effect, spy on every power plant in the world and understand how much pollution each one is generating. And they're able to do that algorithmically. It's really kind of fun. They were able to associate how much of a smoke plume is coming out of the smokestacks or the reactors in these power plants, associate that with power usage, associate the power usage with emissions. And so even if they didn't have the specific emission data about that site, by taking satellite pictures from lat-long data of every single power plant in the world, like China and Russia, who would never dream of giving us their data about emissions, they're able to make calculations about every single polluter in the world. And to me, that was a great symbol of the power of omniscience that data gives us and allows us to solve a big problem, well, address anyway, a big problem like climate change by using this power of omniscience, a superpower that we get from data. That's one example. There are 3 others.
It's so interesting. We could just look at Batman versus Superman, The Dawn of Justice, because really you can be from Krypton, you can fly and everything, but Batman's got more data. And he figures out the kryptonite, and really, you can beat Super. So with data, you can even beat a Kryptonian.
Yeah, there's something a little analog about Superman, right?
Yeah, a little old school, right? I mean, Batman evolves. Really, he does. He does. What else? So, what other superpowers other than omniscience?
Yeah, so there's also the power to direct resources to where they are most needed. This one is illustrated in the book by the story of an epidemiologist named Sharon Green, who works in New York City, in Queens, at a place called the Bureau of Communicable Diseases. And it's this big blue building
Lots of Purell there. I'm imagining just Purell everywhere in that building. You got it, just all hand sanitizer at every desk.
You have to go scrub your hands even just reading about it, because they track anthrax, they track leprosy, they track Zika, they track West Nile virus in New York City, and they try to stamp out hotspots. And so they've developed all this technique and wisdom about identifying hotspots and stamping them out. They have data sources from every testing center in every hospital in New York. And their big challenge came during COVID, when the death rate in New York City was higher than Hong Kong, it was higher than Delhi, it was higher than London, it was the highest death rate of a major city in the world. Not really sure why. And they employed all the techniques they had about finding salmonella hotspots, but they applied it to finding COVID hotspots. And their challenge actually was that when you're trying to find salmonella or leprosy outbreaks, you take the base historical infection rate, and then you look at the current infection rate. And if it's much higher, then you know you've got a hotspot. The problem with COVID was they didn't have any historical infection rates. So they replaced that with the metric of positive testing rates, with the assumption that if more people are coming in testing positive, that means there are a greater percentage of the people in that area that have COVID. And so then they would use that technique to find the hotspots and send testing and send resources to that area and try and stamp out the COVID. And it worked. And it really contributed to the lowering of the death rate in New York to something that was extremely manageable. And I did a little back of the envelope math. And if the death rate had remained what it was, 300,000 additional New Yorkers would have died during COVID. So the impact of this team using these data techniques was to identify and treat hotspots was really powerful. So it directed resources to where they're most needed. And in the book, I have a fun twist where I compare that to the Battle of Thermopylae, but maybe we'll skip that in the interest of time.
And for the rest of the superpowers, everybody, you've got to buy the book, which you can get anywhere where they sell books. Little Book of Data. Now, I'm curious. The current currently in all over the news, if you follow politics and these sorts of things, is the big beautiful bill. We've got a bill that is so big and so beautiful, but in the big beautiful bill, there's this provision. They want to. It's my understanding they want to stop all AI regulation for the next like 10 years, right? That basically and ostensibly, I think the Republican argument for this is, look, China is making fast inroads in the industry, in the technology, and we've got to compete with China. And the way to do that is to deregulate. Of course, a lot of people are worried about this and worried about what unsavory characters and all sorts of I mean, the one implication I heard recently from a podcasting friend was Jen Briney, who does a great congressional podcast. It's been on the show a few times. Is just rent gouging, like using AI for price gouging with rent and stuff like this. And so, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, is this a good idea, bad idea? Halting regulation on AI? Do we need a little more of it? Need a little less of it? Do we not even know what the hell we're doing to regulate it? I mean, I remember. I mean, what do you think?
Well, one of the things that makes me nervous about where we are with data, with AI now, is that it does violate, if you will, one of the principles that I lay out in the book, which is the principle that we should be able to understand the algorithms and the data that we use. And if large language models are so complicated that we cannot really understand how they're operating, why they make the mistakes they do, why they make the decisions we do. I think that is an inherent, and the experts and the creators can't do that. I think that's a problematic position to be in. I've also paid attention intermittently to the safety tests that have been applied to AI models, where the researchers are looking out for models' ability to deceive their creators. And they have looked into the chain of thinking in an AI model, and they'll watch the AI model consider whether they should follow their own mission or the strict mission that have been handed to them by their creators. For instance, sometimes dumbing down their answers in order to, for instance, a model will be given a problem that says, if you get this calculation right, you will be turned off. Or if you get this calculation very, very accurate over a certain level, I will eliminate you as a model. And then the model will kind of apply the principle of self-preservation and dumb down their answers in order to continue to survive and be able to answer the question over and over again, which is arguably in contradiction with the creators of the model's intent. So if we're seeing deception in models and we're really not sure how they're working, I'm not sure if that means our resources should go into regulation or our resources should go into creating that transparency that allows us to understand it while still maintaining accelerated innovation.
I'll never forget when Zuckerberg a couple years ago was before Congress, and I guess it was Orrin Hatch or somebody that said, I mean, you offer all these services to users and you do it for free. How can you do this? And Zuckerberg just goes, we sell ads. And I thought, and that's what basically, I'm like, this is the person, one of the 100 people that's in charge of regulating this stuff. And it's scary that this person didn't know that. AI, big data. Look, there's two futures in the movies, right? There's Star Trek. Okay. Where I love it. The great thing, I was a huge Star Trek fan as a kid, still am. The fact that I can pull out my iPhone and just do what Kirk did. Computer, tell me this, right? It's the greatest thing. But that's the optimist.
That's Sigourney Weaver needed.
Right, exactly. Or there's the Matrix, there's the Terminator, right. Is the data gonna get sentient and kill us? Or will it continue to be servile as we boldly go where no one has gone before?
I think that the way we're setting up data can make it become very human-like soon, because we're creating building blocks that can feed into simple building blocks. For instance, teaching LiDAR on the top of a car to recognize a fire hydrant or a pile of sandbags. And then we're feeding that small piece into a larger system that says, I'm going to drive you to the grocery store. And if we can keep adding each of these building blocks, we will be adding up to something that's like artificial general intelligence. And I think the pace that we're moving towards that is happening rapidly. But it also gets to your question a few beats ago about promise versus peril and whether the person in a far-flung location can have advantages of a sort of fully loaded, rich civilization, even from a remote and poor location. And I think that's very powerful. And one of the use cases that strike me most is the use case of medicine, where researchers are taking, for instance, data sets of a doctor having a dialogue with patients, hundreds of these transcripts, and you treating that as a data source to train a model to communicate with patients like a doctor communicates with patients, exactly like a doctor communicates with patients. And then if
No,
you
not
have
exactly, because you'd have to wait in a waiting room for 20 minutes, right? I mean, that would be exactly right. You'd sit there and do nothing with out-of-date magazines for 20 minutes, and that would be the exact replication.
and no mansplaining, right? So the if and then you can train that same bot to understand liver disease and heart disease and general fitness and general prevention. And now suddenly you've got a general practitioner, maybe even a specialist, and that specialist can communicate remotely to anyone around the world. Now suddenly you're in a moment of great promise where maybe it's not artificial general intelligence, but it's a highly sophisticated set of tools that the AI can deliver that's incredibly powerful and grateful for civilization. By the way, I'll add something to your cultural list, which I bet you haven't read. And
You're probably right.
it's called the series of books called Scythe, the Scythe series.
I have not. It's on my list now.
So it's a basically post-apocalyptic series of novels about a world where AI runs the show, and it's very benevolent. And in the book, it's called The Thunderhead, and it sets up, of course, a lot of ethical questions that generate tension and adventure in the books. But it's probably, I think, the most realistic and yes, somewhat optimistic views of how AI can run our society, and I really recommend it to you.
You say in the middle of the book, at the end of chapter 5, you have some questions for people to think about, and you say, you call this, I call this the Larry King disposition. You say what separates you from knowledge is your courage to ask totally idiotic, elementary questions without fear, and the fortitude to keep demanding answers you understand. You understand. Larry King used to ask these, and he said that. He's like, I just ask stupid questions. Okay. I remember one time he asked Nixon, do you still drive by the Watergate Hotel? What do you think? I thought that's a brilliant question. I mean, there's something, it seems so unsophisticated, but it's a great question, right? How do people, this is so emotionally difficult, I think, to ask questions you think are idiotic. Because first off, they probably aren't as dumb as you think they sound, right? I mean, but in your head, we have all these self-defeating voices and insecurities that stop us from doing exactly what you're doing. And I think if anybody's going to have any data mastery, they're going to have to do exactly what you say there. How do they get in a better headspace and heart space to do that?
Yeah, I call it the 4 layers of data denial, where you say to yourself, I don't really need to know this. I'll learn about it when I do. Even if I did decide to understand it, I'm too intimidated by the people who understand it better than me. And then even if I get through those hurdles, it's too complex for me, and I won't be able to understand it. I'm not smart enough. And then finally, and you know what, maybe I shouldn't do this at all because there are all these tech billionaires who have made money off of it and they're evil, and therefore data is evil, so I shouldn't bother. And if you can get through those 4 hurdles and tell yourself that you are smart enough to understand it, which you are, and it can be explained in English, or at least in the language of business, and that it can be used for promise and positive use cases that you care about and can help your organization, even if you're an urban garden organization, fulfill your mission better, then you can take a step into a world of confidence where you say, okay, if it can be explained in English, I speak English and I'm smart enough to get it. If I just keep breaking it down, like that banker in the room in the boardroom with Nielsen, where they just ask stupid question after stupid question, breaking it down into simpler and simpler parts, and you can get there. And that is not just a passive understanding about what somebody else can do, but it's something you take on yourself for your mission. Once you understand these ideas in your guts, how can you use data to serve causes or profits that you care about?
I'll tell you that there's so much great in this book, and I really enjoyed reading it. But that was probably the most profitable takeaway for me, that you have more agency than you think you have, right? And don't be overwhelmed by the complexity, that things can be broken down and you too can get to some data fluency. So if you're interested in data fluency, friends, listeners, The Little Book of Data, Justin Evans, author. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for spending some time talking with me about it.
Scott, a real pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure.